Okay, hi guys. Welcome to the second tutorial for Architecture 243. The previous went over introduction to Photoshop, basic interface, some of the basic tools, just to kind of give you some orientation. I do want to mention specific to the exercise, and I actually have an Illustrator file open here, that when you're thinking about the image as it's related to an 11 by 17 sheet, I want you to make sure to think about it as a component among other components on that overall 11 by 17 sheet. So what you're looking at here is just an example. This is the image I was working with last time. It is an image component, and I'm going to go through some manipulations of that in Photoshop as the major part of this tutorial. But I'm going to, in composing this, what I'm asking you guys to do is think about it as a component. Think about white space and how that could contribute to the overall composition, in addition to other elements. Here I just decided to throw in a quick shape. I don't know, maybe that's start to organize text or title text or something along those lines. I'm just going to send it to back. Not really reviewing Illustrator here, but just so you can see that the idea here is that it's a component. The image that you'll be working with and manipulating is a component among others on this overall sheet. Okay, so I'm just going to put this to the side, and I'm going to go ahead and open that same image that I had. And really, I had this folder already open. The image here, this is just a JPEG. I'm just going to right-click on it again, and there's a variety of ways to open images in any program or Photoshop. And I'm just going to say Open with Photoshop. To me, that's the quickest, most expeditious way, and I like to go a little bit more directly as opposed to the pull down, file, open, and navigating to that. Okay, so it's just loading up here. All right, so we have this basic image that you should be familiar with. So when I'm talking about in the exercise specific selection areas, I want you to start exploring using these tools. And so there's the marquee tool. And, rectangles and ellipses, those are a little bit more difficult. Those are pretty absolute in terms of their geometry, right? And so those aren't always going to respond to an area, perhaps, that you would like to highlight or begin to manipulate in an image. So what I'm going to encourage that you use are either the lasso, and I'm going to use the Polygon Lasso here in this case, or you could also use the magic wand as a selection tool. Again, the magic wand, I'll select that, and I'm just going to flood an area and select everything that's the same color in that area. If I wanted to expand that and include everything or every area that's that same color in the image, I can select, I just right-clicked here, similar, and it's going to go through and find that level of white throughout the entire image. I'm going to Control D to deselect. That's not what I'm going to be working with, and maybe I'm just going to work with this wedge right here. So I'm going to get my polygon tool. I'm going to zoom here. I'm going to hold down my Alt key and use my scroll wheel. So if I hold that down, I can scroll in and out. It's a nice quick tool there. Again, I can use my space bar to pan to get to that hand tool quick. So hold that down, navigate, and so I can see that area pretty well. Just a couple other quick notes. If I double click on the hand, it's going to fit it to the screen. If I double click on the magnifying glass here, it's going to try to get it to actual pixels here. So it's one of these versions. So if I double click on the magnifying glass, I get to actual pixels. If I double click on the hand, it's going to try to fill the screen the best it can. Okay, so I got to hold my Alt key and zoom back in. And now I'm just going to get my lasso tool. You'll also notice as you get more familiar with Photoshop, there are keyboard shortcuts here. I start to use these pretty often when I'm really getting into an image. So if I'm in some other, in this case like the move command, I could just hit my L key and it'll automatically get me to the lasso tool. And there's a lot of those shortcuts for each of these tools. So I'm just going to roughly, not getting as exact as you guys might like, I just want to select that area. And one of the other tools that I wanted you all to work with was the copy paste. Now, if you notice right now, I haven't done anything to the layer. So if I go back to my layers panel here, it's still background. So if I delete this area or manipulate it, I'm going to see a white background. But I don't want to see that. I actually want it just to be clear or transparent. So I'm going to double click on that layer, and I could rename it in other ways. Again, a quick way is just to double click it. Layer 0 right now to me is fine. I'll say OK. And now I can start to add transparency to the image if that's something that I want to do. If I hold down Control and C, that's going to copy. So that's going to throw it on a clipboard, and I can paste that. And to paste it, I can hit Control V. So that's copy paste, in other words, what I was referring to there. So if I hit copy, so now I copied that image, and I paste it, what it's going to do, it's going to take this selection area, and it's going to paste it, but it's also going to automatically give me an additional layer. So I can copy that, and now I have a layer that is just that wedge piece. If I hide that, I no longer have my selection. I did want my selection tool. Actually, what I'm going to do with this base layer, if I want to just keep that just in case I want to find something else as I kind of move through manipulating, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer, and then I'll turn it off. So this will be like my raw image layer, and then I'll start having other manipulated image layers. Okay, duplicate layer, so that's a right click on the layer tool here where I get all those options. Layer 0 copy, I'll say okay. So now I can turn that original layer off, and I can just start to work with the layer copy. Now I want to select, and this eyeball is just turning layers on and off, this particular area. So first what I'm actually going to do is select my wand tool here, or I can just hit W. And I'm going to, well, it's not selecting anything because I'm on the wrong layer, so then that layer is actually off. So I have to be on the layer. Now it's selected everything around this image, including the boundary of that. So if I wanted to just select that wedge, I can right-click in the selection area, inverse that selection, select inverse. Now it's just the wedge. I can close that, I can open this, now it's that area, and I could like delete it if I wanted to. I actually just hit the delete key, and nothing really happened. You can see I'm on the wrong layer. So delete key, and now it opened that selection up. And I can Control D to deselect. Now if I wanted to, I can bring in another image or something, or slip it behind, or I could actually just leave this open once I want to work with it in Illustrator, and that'll just be a transparent wedge shape in this case, or triangle for the image. In order to do that, I would have to save it as a PNG file to maintain that transparency. A JPEG will flatten it, and then this will turn out to be white. So I'm going to make another selection area. So that's kind of the copy paste, and I just edited that a little bit. I'm going to take this other wedge here. Again, I'm kind of going through this pretty quickly. It actually goes off just fine. Select that, try to pick it up, and I'll complete it there. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy paste that again. I could do this a variety of ways, but I'm going to copy and paste. So now I have that layer, which you can't necessarily see, but there it is. Now these two pieces together. I am on that created layer 2. And if I wanted to rename these layers, because once these start to fill up, you start to lose a sense of what layer is what, I can also right-click on that layer, and I can rename the layer. I could double click on it and just rename it that way. So I could call it, triangle 2 or something like that I might remember. So that starts to be a pretty handy tool, again, once you start to get a bit more advanced with working with layers. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing I did to the last time. Get the wand tool, select everything around, right click, select the inverse. Now I just have that shape. I'm going to go back to this image, and I'm going to make another deletion. So now I have two open areas in that facade. This is the Spertus Institute in Chicago, by the way, by Craig and Sexton. Okay, I'll go back to this wedge, turn everything off but it, and the Control D. Now I could start to work with this image in a variety of ways. Say perhaps, when I'm thinking about this image, I'm thinking about each of these areas kind of moving in a different direction conceptually. So it's kind of tectonically shifting around. So I'm going to start to work with this and apply the motion blur here. So one thing that you notice, I don't have any filter options under filters because I'm on the wrong layer and that layer is off. So I have to get onto the correct layer, filter, go into blur, and motion blur. And I have some options here with this dialog box. I can change the direction with this little wheel here. So if I wanted it to kind of coincide maybe with the mullion pattern or something along those lines, I can also change the distance, and it's in pixels. So this is not very, very low pixels, so it's only blurring like 5 pixels, or I can just really go, well, crazy till it disappears. Here you can just see it's just a kind of a ghost of what it was, and I don't know, maybe I want it to be somewhere in between that. So I could say, okay. Now if I bring back this original image, we see a different kind of area. Again, this transparency will be maintained when I bring it into Illustrator. And maybe I want to do something different with this other wedge piece. I'll turn it off, I'm on the right layer. And maybe this one I'll do the filter motion blur. And if I selected that, see, I just selected the whatever the option was here because it was the last filter that I used. It automatically used the same settings that I had for the last time. I don't necessarily want that. I want a different direction, so I'm going to Control Z to get back, and I could step back. I could also use my history panel, and I want to go back to blur and motion blur. So I don't want it to be as crazy. Stretched out. I'm going to change the direction. Something like that. And I could say, okay. Now, perhaps another thing I wanted to do with this is work with the saturation. That's one of the other things I'd like you guys to work with. So I can go into Image and Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. And I can toggle here. You can play with the hue. You can see it starts to change what hue that area is. I'll leave that at 0 approximately. Yeah. Okay, close enough. There. And then saturation, of course, and then lightness and darkness. So I can make it brighter, or lighter, or darker. But I don't want to do that. I'm just using my scroll wheel now to be more precise with this selection. Saturation. I'm just going to desaturate it. Okay, so if I bring all these together, there's some different kinds of things happening with the image. And again, maybe this is just about motion, movement, shifting, conceptually. Spaces can start to do that, especially as they're related to one kind of space versus the other. I could do this a different way. I'm going to turn these off, and I'll make another selection. Maybe it's just a section of this. Here, I'll go to my lasso tool and zoom in a little bit. And I don't know, maybe I just want to alternately play with this as a kind of a checkerboard or something. Okay, I could either copy and paste this and do the same process that I did here, but in this case, I'm not so concerned with the opacity or transparency. So if I just wanted to desaturate that area, I have my selection made. I can go right up to, and I have to be on the right layer. So here I'm actually on the wrong layer. So I have to go to the right layer, Image, Adjustment, Hue and Saturation, and I could really make it overly saturated or undersaturated, and do it that way. And I could keep making different selections and doing the same thing. So that's another way to make some of these manipulations. Now I could do the same with the blur tool. So again, I'm on the right layer. Here's my selection. If I wanted to blur it, I could just blur that specific area. I'm going to Control Z. So I could kind of do what I did over here in a similar way, although with this technique, because there's solid or opaque image all the way around it, I'm not going to get that transparency that I was looking for with these parts. So I'm going to maintain it as part of the image, and maybe I do want to blur it a bit, and I want a little bit more control. So I'll go to blur, motion blur. I'll change the direction maybe to go kind of up, and the distance. Can't really decide what's going to do here, just to distort those clouds a little bit. Again, thinking about a dreamscape, thinking about, perhaps the idea of a daydream or a dream you had previously, or memory entering into the overall experience of a space. Those are the kinds of things I want you guys to start thinking about. Say OK, and then I could still maintain that selection, image adjustments, and I could desaturate it or oversaturate it, or whatever I wanted to do there. Deletion of white areas, saturation, motion blurring, deletion of white areas. That's basically what I was doing with these wedges. I was suggesting white areas depending on the image, but really it could be any color. I just want you guys to experiment with selections, copy pasting with those selections, selection areas, manipulating the image in those particular areas, and really just experimenting with image manipulation, experimenting with composition within a particular image and how it might play with other images. I could, get a little bit deeper here and even bring in another image right here instead of doing it in Illustrator. So I could do that in another layer. Say I wanted to bring in a sky, a different sky than this sky. Maybe it's, and this is again thinking about the dreamscape kind of attitude, let's say. I don't know, let's pick this one. There's a variety of ways of doing this. I'm going to, if I just drag this over into that image, it's going to place it, but I'm going to have a limited control in terms of working with the image. So if I just hit enter, just dragged it over, and I had that selection, I hit enter to get it into the image. Now it's there, and it's a layer. So you can see there it is, and I can use my move tool. To get to my move tool, I just hit the V shortcut, and I could scale it and do those sorts of things. If I wanted to really work with it a little bit more, because you'll notice if I go into filter, it will let me do some of those things, I suppose. Sometimes it's not as flexible as you would like. So sometimes I'll actually open it up in a different window and then drag that layer over. I've had some difficulty with that in the past. If I wanted a marquee. See, I just made that selection here, marquee selection. I wanted to delete it and said I could not complete your request because the smart object, it comes in as a smart object, is not directly editable. So it'll do blurs and those sorts of things because it can track that, but it won't let me edit it that way. And so the way to get around it, I'm just going to step back into deselect. I'll go back to skies, and okay, I think it was this guy. I'm going to drag it to the top panel here. It'll say copy, but it's going to open it up as another window or file. And now it's a background image. I can actually pull this tab down. And so now I see both. And I could just take this layer and drag it right over to the file that I want it to be on. So I want it to be on here. So there it is now placed. I can now close that image. And now it's there. And I can start to manipulate it. You'll see here, show transform tools here. I can toggle this on and off. You can see these little grips show up, and so sometimes these get in the way for me, but it's a quick way, if I leave those on, to scale and manipulate the image just in a broad sense. I could really distort it and do a lot of different things with it. Maybe I want to do that for this image. If I wanted to maintain the proportion that was already there in the image, I could just hold my shift key down. It's going to maintain the proportion of the original image. But let's say here I'm fine with stretching it, so I'm going to just stretch this puppy down. I don't want the beach to show up there, so I'm going to really stretch it down. I'm just moving my cursor down off the border, and it automatically will start to scroll down for me. I'm a little too zoomed in. I probably should have zoomed out. So let's do that, and I can now hold my Alt key and zoom around a little bit, and maybe I want it to be something like that. Zoom out. Now I'm just finicking with the image here, but and I can enter to log that manipulation in. And you notice the layer here is just layer 3, so I'm going to actually drag it. So the order in which that these layers are placed is the order in which that you'll see the image. So right now this image layer 3 with the sky is on top of that base layer that I had created. So if I want it to be behind, I'll just drag it behind. And there it is. And then I could, make other manipulations, adjust the saturation, let's say. Maybe I really want to blow out some of those colors to do some funky things there. Say okay, and then I'll turn on the other 2 layers, and all of a sudden those start to be kind of layered together. Maybe layer 2, maybe this is too much. It's too opaque, and so I can back off of the transparency here. So if I'm on that layer, there are some options here. I showed a bit of them before, and I can play with the opacity. So now I want to give it to some transparency. I want to kind of see through it a little bit, maybe something like that. I'll do the same to the other. Yeah, something along those lines. And then from here, what I would be able to do, and I would recommend that you keep your files, your original files, separate. And I would just maybe put a date on it. Usually I use a numerical date, and then you can maybe just call it, image 1 or site image 1 with capital letters raw. So you know that's the raw image that you got from your camera. And then you can save that as something else as you start to manipulate it, because sometimes, I've seen it more than once where students really want to go back in time, but they can't because the image has already been manipulated so much that and they did it to the original image, and you can't really go back in time that way. So I would recommend keeping your raw files separate than the files you're actually going to be working with. And that's actually true for file management as you start to think about practice, architectural, or interior design. So I'm just gonna turn that off and just leave these blurry areas the way they are, and then I can go down into File. I want to save as, and that'll give me some options. I guess I'll just leave it. The inspirational images is the folder that was originally. So I'm gonna save it in a couple ways. First, I'm gonna save it as a Photoshop file, and maybe I'll just give it today's date, which is 2017-01. Today's the 13th. Dash. I'll just call it facade sky 1. So that's going to maintain all my layers if I want to go back and manipulate those at a later time. So then I'll still have that to work with. So this will be a little bit bigger of a file. Then what I can do is go back to Save As. And maybe I want to save it as either a JPEG, again, that will flatten everything, or a PNG, which I'll do in this case. It's going to have that same date and the name there as the previous, because I already saved it there. But now it's a PNG, so it's different. And I would just say those defaults are okay. So now we have that as a separate image. Here's the Photoshop file. There it is. Here's the PNG. Okay. Now I'll open the Illustrator file again. You don't have to know anything about Illustrator right now. I just have it open so you can see kind of the ideas of composition that we're looking for. So I just dragged it over. And you can see this image was the one that was already there in Illustrator. And so this fogged area where we created this transparency and the blurring is maintained with that file format. And that's what we want. We want to be able to work with images that way. So it's going to zoom out. It brought it in. You can see that image is huge. And just in case you didn't notice, there's in Photoshop View, I can turn on and off my rulers. Those are just some other options that you have there, so you understand how big the actual image is. And like I said, I didn't realize that this image is ginormous. Anyway, so I brought it in, I placed it. It's automatically going to be on this layer, and this is actually similar to Photoshop. I'm just going to grab this and proportionally scale it down, and maybe I just want it to sit in that area. And so again, those opacities will show up and be maintained, which could be something interesting as you start to work with the images in Illustrator. Okay, I think that'll do it for now. Again, just make sure you're thinking ahead a little bit in terms of the overall composition, the 11 by 17 sheet. There will be these different components. You know, it's the idea is that it's a photo montage, meaning there's a variety of different components coming together to create the overall piece. This is very experimental. I want you guys to explore, just experiment, you know, just get comfortable using some of the tools, and also just, you know, use it as hopefully you have a bit of fun manipulating the images and kind of getting into that. This is really just about experimenting with images and ideas, bringing those together, and workflows that are associated with doing that using tools like Photoshop and ultimately Illustrator. Please send along any questions as they come along. Next week I will be also out of town, but I'll be back the following. And hopefully these are useful as you start to work your way through the exercises. As always, as well, please ask your TAs for specific questions during the actual course sessions. Again, those are meant to be kind of lab sessions, so you can kind of work with some of these tools, ask questions from the TAs, they're familiar with the tools, and bring them to bear in terms of developing your own workflow. Okay, thanks guys. Until the next one.